The city was a mountain of steel and stone, layered upon itself until the streets twisted like veins beneath a skin of smoke. At dusk, its towers clawed at the fading light, their spires aflame with the reflections of a sun slipping behind polluted clouds. The air shimmered with heat from exhaust vents and the sour tang of promethium fires. From the lowest hab blocks to the loftiest bridges, the hive exhaled with the rhythm of countless lives pressed together in uneasy harmony. Down where shadows gathered earliest, the narrow walkways heaved with workers spilling from the manufactoria. Their boots struck the ferrocrete in unison, echoing through corridors that seemed older than memory. Voices tangled with the screech of lifts and the constant thrum of machinery. Lights flickered overhead, struggling to pierce the deepening gloom, and every corner smelled of oil, sweat, and desperation. For the people of the hive, it was the same as it had always been: endless labor, fleeting rest, and the promise of another identical day. Yet within this tide of humanity walked one who was not like the others. The figure moved quietly, blending into the crowd, their cloak drawn tight against the cold currents drifting down from the upper levels. Youth clung to their face, though it was already lined with the strain of silence kept too long. No name was spoken, not even in thought, for names felt fragile things when shadows lingered so near. They walked with careful steps as if the ground itself might betray them. For within the young Psyker's mind something stirred. It was faint at first, a whisper too soft to discern, like the brushing of cloth or the hiss of steam from a pipe. Yet there was no sound carried on air. It pulsed from within, threading through their thoughts with delicate insistence. The voices pressed at the edges of perception, slipping past defenses with the intimacy of breath. The hive roared around them, but those murmurs remained distinct, not louder, yet somehow closer. Words half-formed, heavy with suggestion, crept through the mind's corridors. Sometimes they sounded like memories, a parent's voice calling across years. At other times they resembled strangers, speaking in tones that were neither kind nor cruel, but coldly curious. Each fragment carried the same weight. You are not alone. The Psyker's heart quickened. Their hand brushed against the ferrocrete wall, grounding themselves in its rough certainty. Fear lingered at the edges of every step, though they dared not falter. To stumble was to draw attention, and attention was dangerous. Already the air felt heavier, as though the hive itself leaned closer to listen. Above, the last smear of sunlight dimmed into a bruised violet sky. Tower lights sputtered awake, each one a pale imitation of the stars long hidden beyond layers of cloud and ash. The city descended into its nocturnal rhythm, alarms blaring, doors slamming, 1,000 engines coughing into motion. Beneath it all, the whispers pressed tighter, like water seeping through cracks, patient and unstoppable. The young Psyker drew in a breath that trembled faintly. Somewhere, unseen, the hive kept breathing too. Both were alive, both were vast, and within that vastness, the first threads of dread began to weave themselves into the quiet of an ordinary evening. The Imperium named people like me with a single, damning word: Psyker. I had heard it whispered long before I understood its meaning. It slid through the air of the hab blocks like smoke from the underhive furnaces, a word heavy with dread. Children muttered it to scare each other. Mothers spoke it only behind closed doors, and every tale that followed ended in chains, screams, or the silence of a mind burned empty. I had known the signs since I was small, the flicker of lamps when my temper flared. Dreams that wandered beyond their boundaries, showing me corridors I had never walked, faces I could not have met. At first I thought everyone carried such stray sparks. Then came the voices. Soft as drifting ash, they whispered at the edges of my waking thoughts. Not words at first, just a pressure, a feeling of someone leaning close when no one was there. The scholars of the Scholastica Sicana speak of the Imperium, a sea of thought and nightmare that lies beneath reality. I have never seen it, yet I feel its tide. They say that every Psyker is a door, a fragile breach through which that sea may flood. To the Imperium we are both necessary and damned, weapons to be bound and wielded, or dangers to be scoured away before the warp swallows all. I remember the first time the black ships came to our world. Even the hive's endless roar seemed to hush as their dark silhouettes sank through the smog. No banners, no heraldry, only the cold certainty of their purpose.
Rumors ran faster than the ventilation currents.
People vanished into shadowed corridors, afraid that a careless glance might mark them. Children like me were counted, examined, and judged. Those taken were never seen again, except in the hushed warnings of those who remained. Fear settled in me like a second heartbeat.
I learned to hide.
To still my mind when the whispers grew loud. To bite my tongue when lights flickered or machinery groaned in sympathy with my thoughts. Every lesson in silence came with the memory of those black vessels and the fate of the unguarded. Yet the warp does not care for caution. The voices linger, patient and watchful. Sometimes they echo like distant thunder. Sometimes they breathe secrets almost too soft to catch. I try to tell myself they are nothing more than the creak of ancient ducts, the rumble of hive engines. But in the quiet hours, when the city's noise fades to a slow metallic pulse, they press closer, shaping half-words that brush against my reason. I am told that to be a Psyker is to walk a blade's edge between power and damnation. The Imperium fears what we might unleash, yet cannot survive without the very gifts it condemns.
I feel that paradox in my own skin, a burden I cannot refuse, a sentence I cannot escape.
And as the whispers deepen, I know that the door within me is already open, and something waits just beyond. The words of the Master of Mankind are carved into every shrine and etched on every data slate. Suffer, not the witch, to live. The creed is older than memory, older than the rusting spires that claw at the void. I grew up beneath those words, their warning hammered into my thoughts as surely as the endless clang of the manufactoria. And yet the echo within me betrays the very law that sustains the Imperium. They call him the Emperor, eternal guardian, the light that binds a million worlds. His edicts are the Imperium's spine, and through the Astronomicon his will pierces the black between stars. It is said that he alone tames the raging tides of the warp, holding back the nightmares that gnash at the skin of reality. Every preacher tells us that without his gaze, the demons of that sea would spill forth and devour all. I have heard those sermons so often that the words have become a litany in my own mind, a prayer recited even as the forbidden whispers coil beneath it. The whispers do not heed the Emperor's law. They slide beneath my defenses like oil through fractured metal, bringing scents of cold incense and distant screams. Sometimes they arrive as a single breath, sometimes as a chorus without source. In them I catch fragments of names I dare not speak, syllables that taste of iron and ash. I have heard the old tales of the Great Rift and the storms of madness that swept whole sectors into night.
I know what waits beyond the veil. The Inquisition claims that an untrained Psyker is a beacon, a flare that draws the hungry things from the Imperium.
The demons crave such lights, for through them they may claw into the mortal realm.
Even the sanctions say that no wall of faith or flesh can hold against a will bent on corruption. I have felt that truth.
When my guard slips, the air thickens and the steel underfoot hums with an alien cadence. I have read of the Horus heresy, though the censors try to bury those histories. The War Master's fall began with a whisper in the dark, and his rebellion nearly broke the galaxy. If a son of the Emperor could be turned, what hope for one like me, nameless and unbound? Still the voices beckon. They promise nothing, demand nothing, only wait. The Emperor's priests tell us his golden light shields all loyal hearts, but I wonder if even he can hear the warnings that seep into my dreams. Perhaps the demons are already near, circling like carrion birds beyond sight. Perhaps the warp has marked me since birth, and the edicts carved into stone are no more than the desperate scratches of mortals who fear what they cannot master. The candlelit shrines of the hive promise safety in his name, yet every flicker of flame reminds me how easily darkness swallows light, and how thin the Emperor's wall must be if a single whisper can pass through. The first dream came like a wound, opening in the dark. I woke, or thought I did, inside, a silence too deep for the hive. No thrum of engines, no sigh of ventilation. Only a vast, breathing hush. The air tasted of cold metal and far-off storms. Then came the colour, seeping across the void like spilled light. 1,000 shifting hues that no human tongue could name, each one alive, each one watching. Shapes formed where no shapes belonged. A spiral of black glass rose and fell like a heartbeat, while rivers of molten silver curled in weightless arcs. Stars flickered, then bent inward, folding upon themselves until their glow became a single, lidless eye. The sight both lured and repelled me. I felt it looking back through me, searching, measuring, hungering. A sound followed. Not noise, but a pulse that throbbed in my bones. It carried a rhythm older than the galaxy, a music of tides drawn from the heart of the Imperium. Every beat unstitched another thread of reason. I tried to turn away, but the dream clung like a second skin. Whispers swam within the sound. They were not words, not yet, but they pressed meaning against my thoughts like a blade against flesh. My name, unspoken yet known, shivered at the edge of the chorus. For a heartbeat, I sensed the warp as something vast and luminous, a sea of living thought that glittered like crushed gems in an endless night. Beauty and terror wound together until I could not tell them apart. The vision shifted. Towers of bone erupted from oceans of blood-red mist.
A storm of faces, some human, some not, spiraled upward, their mouths opening in silent scream.
Each face flickered into another, friends and strangers, my own reflection, all devoured by the same unseen flame. The silver rivers boiled, and the lidless eye widened. I ran, though no ground lay beneath me. Each step fell through layers of dream, and still the eye followed. The whispers grew sharper, forming syllables that rang like iron on stone. They promised nothing, demanded nothing, only drew me closer, as if my fear were the key they sought. Then came the shadow. It rolled across the dreamscape like smoke made solid, swallowing color, drinking the stars. The whispers cut off. Only the pulse remained, now hammering like a war drum. A hand of darkness reached for me, fingers stretched across the void, each one longer than the tallest spire. The air split with a sound like tearing glass. I felt the cold of a place where no sun had ever burned. I screamed without breath and jolted awake. The hive's night roar returned in a rush, machinery grinding, vents sighing, distant crowds. Yet the silence of the dream lingered, coiled behind my ears.
Sweat chilled my skin.
The whispers were gone, but their echo clung to the walls like an afterimage of lightning. I knew with a certainty deeper than fear that the dream had not ended. It had only marked the beginning. Rumor travels faster than the hive's winds. In the canteens and the endless lift shafts, people speak in half-whispers of things they swear they have never seen. I hear their words whether I want to or not, and lately the voices from my own mind seem to lean closer when the stories begin. They talk of the Imperium, the warp, as though it is an ocean hidden beneath the skin of the universe. The elders call it the the Sea of Souls. Traders from distant ports say that ships must plunge through that sea to cross the stars, guided only by the Emperor's light. Without his beacon, they would be lost in storms that never end. The idea should be wondrous, but every voice that speaks of it carries the same tight fear. Some claim the warp is alive, that it feeds on every thought and dream. Anger and grief, joy and longing, each emotion is said to stir the currents like wind across dark water. Sailors who return from long voyages tell of storms that answer a crew's despair, of ghostly shapes that rise from nothing when tempers flare. They say a careless mind can summon things that should never have form. I have seen enough to believe them. My own nightmares bleed into waking hours. Colours flicker at the corners of my sight, too vivid to belong to rust and steel. Sometimes the air around me quivers like heat over metal, and in that shimmer I glimpse a place of impossible light. When I blink, it is gone, but the afterglow stains my thoughts. Children in the lower levels whisper of demons, creatures born of the warp's hungers. They wear 100 shapes, beasts of fire, shadows of pure malice, masks that smile while they devour. A labourer once told me of a void ship torn apart when such a creature slipped through a navigator's mind. The story ended with a single phrase, spoken like a prayer and a curse. No survivors. Others speak of the black ships, the Emperor's hunters. They roam the stars to find those touched by the warp people like me before the demons can claim us. Some say the ships are salvation, others call them prisons. All agree that those taken aboard are never the same. The whispers inside me listen when these tales are told. I feel them stir, a faint echo beneath the words of strangers. Sometimes their cadence matches the rhythm of the stories, as if the warp itself leans close to hear its name. It is a quiet reminder that these dangers are not distant legends. They are the tide pressing against the edges of my mind, waiting for a single crack. I walk through the hive's crowded corridors, the rumours trailing after me like smoke. Each tale is a fragment of warning, and each flicker at the corner of my vision makes the warnings real. The warp is not just a place beyond the stars. It is here already, and it is watching. The last harvest of the black ships still stains the memory of this hive like an old wound. Even now, years later, scraps of the story slip between the hab levels in half-breathed fragments. I was only a child then, but the echoes linger. The silence that fell when the first silhouette broke through the smog, the way the crowd drew back from the landing docks as though the air itself had turned poisonous. The vessels bore no sigils of house or guild, only the sable mark of the Inquisition. Those who knew whispered of the Ordo Hereticus, hunters of the witch and the unclean. It is said that among them walked the black-robed agents of the holy Ordos, some mortal, some touched by the Emperor's own strange grace, whose gaze could strip the lies from a soul.
None dared meet their eyes. When the collectors came, they moved like shadows wrapped in sanction.
Silent, precise, each step measured as if the ground itself waited to betray them. I remember the weight in the air, as if the hive's endless machinery had paused to listen. Mothers hid their children, but the searchlights found every trembling corner. Those chosen were taken without a word, drawn into the ship's hollow hearts where no prayer could follow. The stories that followed were worse. Dockside workers spoke of screams that seeped from the hull as the ships prepared to break orbit. Others swore they felt the temperature drop, frost blooming on the rails though the furnaces burned as always. A rumour spread that a demon had scented the gathering of souls and clawed at the veil, that the black ships fired their guns into the void not at an enemy of flesh but at something unseen. The priests of the ecclesiarchy claimed it was merely the cleansing rite, the roar of faith made manifest. Yet even the most pious lowered their eyes when they said it. Some speak still of the crimson storm that bled across the upper atmosphere as the fleet departed, a warp lightning that danced like a wound in the sky. Navigators muttered that it was the reflection of the Astronomicon itself, but the old Manufactorum hands say it was the sign of a predator. On the lower decks the rumours twist further. They whisper of an Ordo Malleus Inquisitor who walked among the collectors, carrying wards wrought in silver and the bones of saints. It is said he bargained with the Grey Knights, those secret sons of Titan who fight the great enemy in silence. Whether he found what he sought, none can say, but some nights the lights still flicker in the old docks as if remembering his passage. These are the tales the hive will not forget, though few speak them aloud. And when the distant hum of a ship's engine cuts through the night, every heart recalls that harvest and wonders which shadow waits behind the next arrival. The news came first as a tremor of rumour, barely more than a nervous hiss in the market vents. A dockhand swore he had seen a silhouette far out in the void, a blot of darkness drifting against the star-choked haze. Another claimed the astropathic choirs had fallen silent mid-chant, their voices choked by an unseen will. By the next shift cycle, the whispers ran through every tier of the hive like a contagion. The black ships were coming. No one spoke the words loudly.
They did not need to.
Fear carried them. Even the roar of the Manufactoria seemed to hush when the name passed from mouth to mouth. Traders folded their stalls early. Priests doubled the incense at the shrines until the air grew heavy and bitter. Children were herded inside, their eyes wide with questions no one dared answer. I felt the change before I heard the tales. The psychic murmurs that haunted my dreams quickened, their tones sharpening like blades on stone. It was as though the void itself leaned closer, drawn by a magnet buried deep within me. Each breath of the hive tasted charged. Every spark of static from the great power lines sang like a distant call. On the lower levels, panic spread like spilled promethium. Some of those touched by the warp vanished into forgotten ducts, hoping the labyrinth of rust and shadow might hide them. Others sought the priests, begging for purification rites or false certificates of soul cleansing. But the faithful knew the truth. No ward of incense or parchment could blind the Emperor's hunters. I passed a shuttered hab block where a mother clutched her child, rocking in silence as a neighbour scraped away a crude glyph from the doorframe. The Mark II interlocked circles was a sign of the Psyker, drawn by those who thought to sell their neighbours for favour or coin. The mother's eyes burned with fury and despair, but she did not speak. The hiss of her breath followed me long after I turned the corner. High above, the great spires shone with a false dusk. The warp light from my dreams seemed to linger there, staining the clouds in colours the eye could not name. The black ships had not yet breached the atmosphere, yet their presence weighed upon the hive like an invisible tide. Every whispered prayer, every flickering lumen felt like the heartbeat of a city waiting for judgment. The voices inside me matched that rhythm. Sometimes they urged me downward to the hidden levels where fugitives vanished. Sometimes they pulled me upward toward the docks as if the ship's gravity already claimed me. Each step I took carried the certainty that running or hiding would make no difference. Somewhere beyond the smog-choked sky, the Emperor's silent vessels cut through the dark. I could not see them, but I felt their shadow settle across my soul, a weight as inevitable as the turning of the stars, and as final as a sentence already spoken. Propaganda posters bloomed overnight, pasted across every bulkhead and dripping wall as if the hive itself had sprouted warning sigils. Their crimson ink gleamed under the lumen strips, wet and fresh as blood. At the center of each poster towered the Emperor, wreathed in golden light, his eyes twin suns of judgment. Beneath the image ran the words, "The tithes of souls are the Emperor's due." I stopped before one, feeling the paper's damp edge curl in the chemical breeze. Around me, a knot of workers slowed their pace, each pretending not to stare. An old man spat and muttered a prayer to the God Emperor, his voice trembling. "The black ships," he said, low enough that only those nearest heard. "They come for the tithe," a young woman beside him shivered. "For Psykers," she whispered, glancing toward the upper gantries as though the hunters might descend that very moment. "They say the warp calls to them makes them dangerous. Better the Emperor takes them than the demons do." Another worker shook his head. "Better for whom?"
No one returns. His words hung in the air like a curse. I had heard the rumors before, but never with such weight.
"The tithe of souls an offering demanded by the Imperium itself. Every world must pay it, not in grain or ore, but in lives touched by the immaterium. The Psykers are gathered like a harvest and borne away aboard the black ships. Where they go,
Few dare to guess. Some say they are taken to Terra.
the cradle of mankind, where the Emperor sits upon his golden throne. There, it is whispered, thousands of Psykers are fed to him every day, their life force sustaining the astronomicon that guides the star-faring fleets. Others insist the chosen are trained as sanctioned servants, astropaths, battle Psyker warriors, instruments of imperial will. Yet in every version of the tale the ending is the same: most are never seen again, their souls consumed like candles before a storm. The hive's loudspeakers blared a hymn of loyalty, drowning the murmurs for a moment. The voice of some distant preacher rolled across the ducts. To give the Emperor his due is to safeguard mankind. Rejoice in his tithe, for through it humanity endures. But beneath the chant, fear spread. I caught the quick glances, the stiff shoulders of those who prayed their names would not be called.
Mothers tightened their grip on their children.
Men who had worked the same shifts for decades looked suddenly like hunted prey. The whispers in my head quivered, echoing the preacher's cadence with a tone both mocking and seductive. The words of the hymn and the silent murmur intertwined until I could not tell which came from the vox and which from the warp. As the hymn faded, the posters seemed to glow in the half-light, their red ink darkening like fresh blood. The Emperor's gaze followed me down the corridor, and I felt the weight of his tithe settle like a shadow across my heart. High above the hive, beyond the choking haze of exhaust and the ceaseless roar of machinery, the Emperor's servants prepared their harvest. To most, the black ships are only a shadow of terror, but the whispers that slip through the lower decks tell of rival powers that guide their course. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, those austere keepers of the Emperor's psychic tithe, are said to govern the choosing. Clad in robes of midnight blue, they weigh each mind like a precious ore, sifting for talent and doom. Their task is not merely collection. It is the feeding of the Astronomicon, the great beacon of light that spears through the immaterium and makes interstellar travel possible. Without it, the warp would swallow every vessel whole and leave the Imperium adrift in endless night. Yet even within their sanctums, politics coils like a hidden serpent. Old rumors speak of schisms between the Telepathica and the Holy Inquisition. The Ordo Hereticus demands vigilance against the unbound witch, while the Ordo Malleus hungers for Psykers strong enough to resist the great enemy. Some say their agents compete in secret, each seeking the most gifted souls for their own silent wars. It is whispered that when the Astronomicon dims, the golden throne itself hungers. Every day, thousands of Psykers are sacrificed to keep the Emperor's light alive, a ceaseless offering of thought and spirit. The Telepathica claims this as holy duty, but the Inquisition watches, calculating which souls might serve better as weapons than fuel. The black ships become not merely harvesters, but pawns in a greater game where every life is a piece to be moved or burned. The hive priests speak only the official truth, that the Emperor protects, that his will is unity. But the workers in the Shadow Ducks remember other stories. They tell of inquisitors who bartered with Telepathica masters, offering secrets in exchange for singular Psykers whose talents could tilt the balance of entire sectors. Some of those chosen were never delivered to Terra. Their names vanish like smoke, their fates whispered only among the Ordo's inner circles. When I hear these tales, the voices in my mind stir like a restless tide. I picture the Astronomicon, an unending blaze of the Emperor's own power, flickering as the sacrifices burn away, each soul a brief spark feeding the eternal fire. And I wonder whether those who play at politics understand how thin the wall truly is between their power and the hunger of the warp. The black ships approach not as servants of a single will, but as the instruments of factions whose ambitions reach far beyond this hive. Somewhere in that dark web of duty and rivalry, my own fate is already being measured, a single mind weighed against the needs of a galaxy. Panic spread through the hive like a living thing, faster than the scream of a warning klaxon. The first sign came at dawn, if the hive's false cycle of lumen strips and chime tones could be called dawn, when the great ventilation towers fell silent. For a single breath, the endless rumble of machinery ceased, and in that hollow quiet the people heard what they had feared. The distant, keening roar of engines that did not belong to any manufactorum. The black ships had entered low orbit. By the next cycle, the avenues writhed with crowds. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Augur screens flickered with frantic prayers and half-legible directives. The Emperor's sigil glared from every wall, hastily repainted in dripping crimson, as if faith could ward off the hunters. Children clung to their parents while the elders muttered liturgies, their voices rising and breaking in the echoing corridors. Fear sharpened into action. The gifted, those who carried even a whisper of the warp, vanished into forgotten ducts and rusted sub-levels. I glimpsed them only in passing, a gaunt woman with eyes too bright, a boy clutching a charm of knotted wire. They moved like shadows, guided by desperation rather than hope.
Others chose a different path.
Men and women who had shared meals and shifts for years began to watch each other with sudden suspicion. A single careless flicker of light, a strange dream recounted over rationale, and the neighbors' glances grew sharp as blades. The reward for loyalty was whispered to be absolution, perhaps even a lighter tithe. In the face of the black ship's judgment, betrayal became a form of prayer. I passed a square where a crowd had gathered around a trembling youth.
A foreman held the boy by the collar, shouting that he had heard voices no one else could hear.
The boy's pleas vanished beneath the chant of the onlookers, for the Emperor, for the Emperor. When the arbitrators arrived in their black armor, the crowd stepped aside without a word. The youth was dragged away, his eyes wide with terror and something like relief. Above, the sky itself seemed to bruise. The warp light from my dreams bled across the smog, a shimmer of colors that danced like oil on water. I felt the whispers within me twist and tighten, their cadence matching the frantic rhythm of the hive. It was not fear they brought, but a slow, inexorable pull, as though the ships in orbit were already drawing me upward, thread by invisible thread. Down in the underhive, gunfire cracked like distant thunder. Gangs fought to seal off forgotten tunnels, selling passage to those desperate enough to pay. Yet every hidden path smelled of doom. The black ships were not hunting bodies. They were hunting minds. No barricade of rust and steel could stop what they sought. By the time the ventilation towers rumbled back to life, the city had changed. Trust had become a luxury no one could afford.
Every eye carried suspicion, every shadow a threat.
And in that charged silence after the first wave of panic, I understood. The hunt had only just begun. I slipped through the hive's lower passages long after the false dawn lights had dimmed again, the air thick with rust and the sour tang of chemical runoff. Each step sent echoes rattling through the ducts, like whispers I could not silence. Behind me, the city howled alarms, prayers, the occasional crack of gunfire, but here, in the bowels of the hive, sound fell away to a tense, metallic hush. I told myself I was hiding to protect my family, yet every turn of the corridor cut me farther from them, and guilt coiled tighter around my thoughts. If the black ships found me, they would not stop with me. Neighbors would be questioned, perhaps punished for their silence. My parents, if they survived the questioning, would live under a mark of suspicion that never faded.
And if they betrayed me to save themselves?
The thought stung, but it would be no more than the Emperor's law demanded. The whispers in my head knew my fear. They pulsed like a second heartbeat, each subtle as a breath yet impossible to ignore. Sometimes they carried the sound of my mother's voice, gentle and steady. Other times they twisted into something darker, a hiss of promises I dared not hear. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the voices bloomed inside the bone. At a junction where 3 maintenance tunnels met, I paused to listen. Far above, the distant chant of a vox preacher drifted down the vents, extolling the Emperor's justice and the sanctity of his tithe. The words blurred into a drone that mingled with the whispers until I could not tell where one ended and the other began. For a moment I almost answered, almost let the sound carry me upward toward the ships I dreaded. A scuff of boots snapped me back. 2 figures approached, their lumen torches casting long, trembling spears of light. Not arbitrators, just workers, perhaps searching for a way out of the chaos. But the sight of them froze me. One careless glance and they might see the fear in my eyes, might notice the flicker of strange color that sometimes danced across my skin when the whispers grew strong. In these days of panic, that was enough to condemn. I pressed myself into the shadows until their lights faded. When the echoes of their steps died, I exhaled a breath I had not realized I held. My legs shook with the weight of the choice that still waited. Keep running, or turn back and face whatever fate the Emperor decreed. For an instant, I imagined stepping into the open, surrendering before the black ships and their silent collectors. Perhaps that would spare those I loved. Perhaps. But the whispers throbbed with sudden urgency. Neither command nor plea, only a wordless pull that promised nothing except that my path was not yet ended. I moved on, deeper into the forgotten ducts. Above me the hive groaned like a vast and restless beast. Every echo sounded like pursuit, every gust of air like the breath of something closing in. Fear and guilt wrestled in my chest. But the need to move away from family, away from capture, drove me forward, one trembling step at a time. They came like a shadow, given form, their arrival marked not by fanfare but by the sudden hush that rolls ahead of a storm. First came the sanctioners, the black-armored hunters of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Their masks were wrought in the likeness of impassive saints, each faceplate a cold simulacrum of piety that turned human fear into a silent confession. Gold scripture traced their breastplates verses of the Lex Imperialis, etched so finely they caught even the dim hive light. No words passed their lips. Their discipline was the Emperor's command made flesh. They moved in pairs, every step precise, boots striking the deck in unison like the ticking of a vast, unseen clock. In their hands they bore man-catchers tipped with wards of sanctified silver, and at their belts hung runic seals that shimmered with faint blue fire. The scent of incense followed them, sharp as burnt copper. Wherever they walked, the crowds parted in reverent dread. Behind them padded the real terror, the Psyhounds. Creatures of the Scholastica Cicana's darkest kennels, they were neither fully beast nor wholly of the warp. Their hides shimmered with a sheen that bent light, and their eyes burned with the cold clarity of the Imperium. Each breath exhaled a faint mist that smelled of ozone and old blood. They needed no leash. Invisible tethers of thought bound them to their masters, and their senses reached beyond flesh. It was said they could taste the spark of an untrained mind across 100 paces. When the hounds paused, the sanctioners paused with them. A slow tilt of a narrow muzzle, a ripple of warp light across fur, and the hunters would turn without a word. The prey might be hidden behind a dozen walls or buried in a crowd of thousands, it made no difference. The hounds scented the soul, not the body. Witnesses speak of wards that bloom like sudden frost when the hounds fix upon a target. Glyphs of protection flare to life across the sanctioner's armor, and the air hums with the low drone of a psychic null field. Some swear they feel their thoughts drag, as if the hounds drink the very currents of the mind before striking. Occasionally, an inquisitorial seal glimmers among the hunters, a discreet mark of the Ordo Hereticus or the rarer Ordo Malleus. No herald announces their presence. Their authority needs none. The mere sight of that sigil is enough to silence even the boldest tongue. It means that what follows will not be recorded in any administratum ledger, and that the Emperor's judgment is already decided. The sanctioners take their quarry alive when possible, but mercy plays no part in their craft. A Psyker who resists meets the bite of the hound's fangs forged of silvered bone, each one etched with wards older than the Imperium itself. The captured fall silent not from pain, but from the sudden weight of the Emperor's will pressing through their own minds. The Hive will speak of these hunters for decades, yet no one will admit to watching too closely. Their work is meant to be seen only once and remembered forever. Shadows stretched across the Hive like ink poured into water, deepening until even the lumen strips seemed to dim in their glow. I felt the change first in my bones, a slow vibration like the hum of a distant engine, then in the air itself as it thickened with unseen weight. The whispers that once brushed the edges of my thoughts now spoke with sudden clarity, each syllable a knife of sound cutting through the clamour of the city. Open. The word did not come from without.
It bloomed inside me, as natural and irresistible as breath.
I staggered against a wall of corroded steel, my pulse hammering like a forged piston. The corridor ahead blurred, outlines of pipes and rails bending into impossible angles. For a heartbeat, the rusted ducts gleamed like molten glass,
and a scent of cold roses filled the air. I tried to breathe,
to anchor myself in the familiar stink of oil and ozone, but the Hive's reality unraveled like smoke. Colours too vivid to name bled through the metal violet that tasted of salt, blue that rang like a bell in the skull. The whispers rose again, no longer many but one, a voice without face or gender that carried both command and invitation.
Open. I clutched my temples, but the sound vibrated through the marrow of my bones.
The corridor tilted. A seam of light split the air before me, a hairline crack in the fabric of the world. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat, brightening with every frantic breath. Through it poured a shimmer like the heart of a storm, twisting ribbons of fire and shadow, glints of eyes that were not eyes, a vast horizon of thought pressing against the veil. My knees gave way. I knelt on the cold deck plates as the seam widened, its edges trembling like the lips of a wound. From the rift drifted sounds both beautiful and terrible, the rush of distant seas, the wail of choirs sung by voices not born of flesh. Each note carried a promise, each cadence a threat. You are the door. The voice filled me, not in speech but in certainty. My skin prickled as if every nerve had turned to glass. I felt the weight of something vast leaning closer, patient and hungry. The rift's light washed over me, staining my vision until the hive itself seemed a faint echo of a deeper truth. A sudden shock, like a hand of ice, dragged me back. The crack in the air flickered, then narrowed to nothing. The hum faded, leaving only the distant thrum of machinery and the harsh rasp of my own breath. Yet the after-image remained, burned into my sight, a scar of light that no darkness could erase. The whispers fell silent, but their command lingered, carved into the core of my being. The rift was not gone. It had only learned my name. The silence after the rift's closing was a hollow thing, like the pause between heartbeats. I pressed my back to the chill of the steel wall and tried to steady my breath, but the hush itself seemed alive. The hive's distant machinery rumbled somewhere far above. Yet beneath that noise another sound began to rise, a slow, coaxing murmur.
As if the very air were drawing me deeper. Mist bled from the seams of the deck plates, pale and luminous.
Shapes moved within it, first like drifting smoke, then like figures half-formed from the substance of a dream. Their outlines wavered, faces shifting from familiar to strange. My mother's eyes, a friend's smile, then features I had never known yet somehow recognized. The mist thickened until the corridor became a hall of living fog, each shape glowing with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice whispered my name. It came from everywhere and nowhere, warm as a promise. The figures turned toward me, their eyes bright with impossible colors, golds that shimmered like molten sun, blues deeper than any ocean. When they spoke, the sound was music and meaning at once. You are more than they will allow. One figure stepped forward, its form both man and woman, neither and both. Wings of fire unfolded behind it, feathers of crimson and violet that shed sparks into the mist. The Imperium fears you, it said, in a tone that stroked the mind like silk. But we would give you freedom.
Power to shape the stars.
No chains, no tithe.
Only the truth of what you are. Another followed, a creature of shadow and starlight whose grin held the curve of knives.
They will burn you to feed their dying god, it purred. Serve us, and you will never know fear again. Your voice will command storms. Your thoughts will bend empires. The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat I saw the galaxy unbound. Stars spinning like coins in a cosmic tide, worlds bowing beneath my will. I felt the surge of energy, the intoxicating thrill of limitless choice. My heart beat faster, drawn to the vision as a moth to flame. But beneath the music of their words ran another sound, subtle yet sharp. The hiss of something hungry. The wings of fire cast shadows that writhed like serpents. The knife-edged grin stretched too wide, and in the heart of their promises I tasted the bitter tang of deceit. I closed my eyes. The voices pressed closer, coaxing, pleading, their sweetness now laced with a quiet desperation.
I felt their breath like a cold wind at the base of my skull.
For an instant, the temptation burned an end to fear, an escape from the Emperor's hunters. Then the mist quaked.
A sudden chill swept through the corridor, and the figures recoiled as if struck.
Their colors guttered to ash, the voices thinned to a hiss, fading into the endless hum of the hive. I opened my eyes to darkness and the dull echo of my own heartbeat. The vision was gone, but its echo lingered, a whisper of power, and the knowledge of how near I had come to answering. In the fading hush after the vision, the warp's scent lingered ozone and incense, copper and cold roses, as though the dream refused to die. The whispers retreated, yet a residue of meaning clung to every breath. I had glimpsed only fragments, but each fragment carried the weight of legends the ecclesiarchy tries to bury. The old texts speak of the great game, the endless war fought not with armies, but with desire itself. Though the preachers name them only as the great enemy, I felt their presence in the shapes that beckoned me. One voice dripped with the lure of forbidden knowledge, a shimmer of intellect that could twist truth and unmake reason. The ancients once called such a power Tsench, the architect of fate, and in the curling patterns of light I sensed the subtle pull of his endless schemes. Another had worn a grin of knives and promised delight without fear. Its laughter tasted of honey and ashes. I knew without knowing that this was the same dark joy the cults of old whispered as Slanesh, the prince of excess, who feasts on every hidden craving. The song it offered was sweet enough to drown a soul before it understood the price. A third presence had throbbed like a distant drum, each beat heavy with blood and wrath. I remembered the old soldiers' tales of Khorne, the lord of battle, whose rage turns war into worship. In the pulse of my own racing heart, I heard the echo of that crimson rhythm, and it frightened me more than any spoken threat, and beneath it all, a slower tide rot, patience, the quiet promise of an ending that is also a beginning. The scent of wilted gardens and the soft rasp of decay lingered after the mist dispersed. It was the same unending murmur the medical fear to name, Grandfather Nurgle, whose gifts are both curse and comfort, who waits with arms wide for every living thing to fall. These were not merely phantoms. They are the warp's gods, the powers that play the great game, each moving a snare for mortal souls. The preachers teach that the Emperor's light alone bars their triumph. Yet in that vision I felt how close they already stand, each whisper, a thread tugging at the walls of reality. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to summon the hymns of protection I had learned as a child. But the names of the Chaos gods clung to my mind like burrs. Their temptations were not distant fables. They were currents in the sea of souls, reaching for me even now. Above the hive, unseen yet certain, the black ships drew nearer. And I wondered whether even the Emperor's shadow could shield me from a game that has raged since time began. The hive's endless roar faltered as if the city itself held its breath.
Even the great manufactoria slowed, their smokestacks coughing a hesitant mist that drifted in the chemical air.
From the highest spires to the deepest ducts, a single shiver of silence swept through the steel labyrinth. We all felt it the moment when the black ships finally came. They descended through the bruise-colored clouds like fragments of a dying star.
Vast and lightless, they blotted out the false sun panels, turning the day into a twilight of rust and shadow.
No banners marked their hulls, no running lights betrayed their passage. Only the slow, implacable weight of their presence announced their purpose. Each vessel was a cathedral of iron. Buttressed towers and serrated spires jutted from their flanks like the bones of some colossal saint.
Vast gun emplacements gaped along their sides, silent but heavy with threat.
The hulls bore scars of ancient wars, gouges deeper than hab blocks, yet no flame of battle could dull the black sheen of their armor. Their size defied reason. Entire districts could have nested within a single bay, and still there would have been room for more. As the first ship broke through the low smog, the air itself changed. A pressure built behind my eyes, a throbbing weight that dulled every thought. The whispers in my mind, so insistent in these last days, fled like startled birds. In their place yawned a sudden, terrifying quiet. The Sinal fields of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. I had heard rumors of their power, but no tale had prepared me for the emptiness they brought. It was as though a part of the world had been scraped away, leaving only cold and the echo of a silence too vast to name. Even those without the gift felt it. I saw men clutch their temples, women stagger as if struck by unseen hands. Children whimpered without knowing why. The ships lowered with the patience of glaciers, their thrusters bleeding slow rivers of fire. The heat turned the upper haze to molten gold, but no warmth reached us. The psychic hush deepened until the hive's own noise seemed an intrusion. Somewhere far above, docking clamps the size of fortress walls groaned into place, a sound like the grinding of mountains. People fell to their knees. Some prayed, some wept, some simply stared with hollow eyes.
I stood among them, unable to move.
The silence within me was complete. No whispers, no dreams, only the distant echo of my own heartbeat. The black ships had arrived, and with them came a dread beyond words, the certainty that all escape had already ended. The hunt began with the toll of a single, hollow bell. Its iron note rolled through the hive's steel bones, carrying farther than any klaxon. By the third peal, every corridor had fallen to a tense hush. Then came the sound of boots measured, relentless like the ticking of some vast and merciless clock. Sanctioners advanced in black ranks, their masks reflecting the trembling glow of lumen strips. Incense burned in braziers carried by robed attendants, the smoke drifting in slow coils that tasted of copper and old prayers. At each intersection the hunters paused, sigh-hounds lifting their heads as if scenting the air for thought itself. When the beasts turned, the sanctioners followed without a word. Crowds pressed against the walls, faces drawn with fear. Mothers clutched their children, old men bowed their heads and whispered litanies. No one dared speak as names were read from a scroll of crackling parchment. Each name hung in the air like a sentence. I was among them before I realized it, swept forward by the current of bodies. The parchment rustled. My name sounded stark and final. A hand like iron closed on my shoulder. They moved us in silence through the hive's echoing arteries. No chains bound our wrists, yet the weight of the Sinol fields crushed every thought of escape. The whispers in my mind, once a constant murmur, were gone, leaving only a blank ache, as though part of me had been torn away. Around me walked others, chosen for the Emperor's tithe. A boy scarcely 12 clutched a strip of cloth, his lips moving in a prayer, too soft to hear. Beside him, a woman with the scarred hands of a labourer stared straight ahead, her eyes fixed on some place far beyond the walls.
An elder limped at the rear, each step a defiance that could not last.
We did not speak. We barely dared to breathe. Our fear was a single, shared silence. The procession wound toward the docking spires where the black ships waited. Along the route, propaganda posters flared crimson in the lumen light. To serve the Emperor is to be eternal. Their words blurred in my vision, each letter a cruel reassurance. At the foot of a colossal embarkation ramp, the attendants raised their censers high. The incense thickened until the air itself seemed to clot. One by one we were led to a line of robed adepts who marked our foreheads with cold sigils of sanction. The touch burned like frost. Somewhere within the ship, a great engine throbbed, a heartbeat of iron and will. I glanced at the boy with the strip of cloth. He met my gaze for an instant, eyes wide with a terror too deep for tears. Then the sanctioners ushered him forward, and the crowd swallowed him whole. The bell tolled again, sealing the moment. Whatever life had come before was over. We had become the Emperor's tithe, and the black ships were ready to carry us into the darkness between the stars. The black ships swallowed us in a silence so deep it felt like the warp's own breath. The moment the boarding ramp sealed, the hive's familiar clamour vanished, replaced by a low, resonant hum that settled into the bones like a second heartbeat. Lumen strips glowed with a cold, unwavering light, throwing long shadows across walls of black adamant etched with wards that shimmered faintly in the half-dark. We were herded through corridors that seemed less built than grown from some immense iron cathedral. Arches soared above us, their ribs studded with silver sigils and hexagrammatic wards. Each symbol pulsed in time with the ship's hidden engines, a quiet rhythm of power and protection. I felt their pressure as a constant ache behind the eyes, a warning to anything born of the warp. From hidden alcoves emerged the robed figures of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. They moved with the measured grace of those long practiced in silence. Their robes were the deep blue of a starless night, trimmed with narrow bands of argent thread that caught the lumen light like captured starlight. Their faces were masked in polished brass, expressionless visages of saints and forgotten heroes. Only their eyes, glimpsed through narrow slits, betrayed a faint inner glow, like coals banked beneath ash. Each carried a staff capped with a crystal that hummed in sympathy with the ship's engines. When they passed, the air tightened, as if the void itself bent to their will. I felt the whispers in my mind recoil, shrinking to a thin, wary murmur. These were the Emperor's sole wardens, trained from childhood to master the Imperium, and their presence was a living bulwark against the great enemy. Among them walked figures of higher station, their robes heavy with gold filigree and seals of authority. Some bore the inquisitorial rosette upon their collars, a discreet mark of the Ordo Hereticus, whose gaze falls on witch and demon alike. They did not speak, but their very stillness carried judgment. We passed chambers where the walls themselves seemed to drink the light. Null cells lined with blackstone waited like open graves, each one ready to contain a mind too dangerous for freedom. Further still lay sanctums sealed by triple doors of rune-etched adamant, where only the highest telepathica adepts might tread. A faint chanting seeped through those barriers, no words, only a ceaseless drone that vibrated in the marrow, a hymn to hold the warp at bay. In that endless hush, I sensed the ship's true purpose, not merely to carry us to terror, but to cage the very essence of what we were. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica ruled here, and even the warp itself seemed to pause, held at the edge of a silence only the Emperor could command. The chamber of testing lay deep within the black ship, beyond a maze of sealed bulkheads and whispering wards. The air grew colder the farther we were led, until our breath hung in faint crystals beneath the lumen strips. Every step echoed like a knell. The corridor ended in a pair of doors wrought from blackstone, each slab etched with the hexagrammatic wards that burn the warp itself. When they parted, a hush deeper than silence spilled out a void that pressed on skin and thought alike. We entered as if crossing into a tomb. The hall beyond was vast, a cathedral carved from darkness. Rows of sigil staves flanked a central dais, their crystals pulsing in time with a hidden heartbeat. At the dais's summit waited the robed masters of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Their faces were hidden behind masks of beaten gold, features smooth and remote as forgotten idols.
Only their eyes betrayed life, cold embers beneath the metal, reflecting a light I could not see. They began the ritual without words.
One by one we were summoned to stand upon a circle of silver inlaid into the deck. Runes flared beneath each trembling captive, and the chamber filled with the low hum of chanted syllables. The sound burrowed through bone and thought, a vibration that tested every corner of the soul. When my turn came, the air tightened, as though the void itself had closed around me.
A hooded adept raised a staff capped with a shard of midnight crystal. Light bled from it in rippling waves, each pulse a question I could not hear, yet felt in the marrow of my mind.
The whispers that had haunted me for so long rose in sudden fury, only to falter against the circle's glow. Their retreat left a hollow ache, a silence sharper than any scream. Visions flared behind my eyes. I saw the warp's shifting tides, stars swallowed in storms of living color, the faces of those who had tempted me with power, the patient hunger of demons whose names I dared not speak. The voices of the adepts wove through the vision like a net, their chant steady, merciless.
Measure the soul, their silence seemed to say.
Weigh its worth. The crystal's light grew blinding. Every secret I had buried, every fear, every flicker of forbidden desire lay exposed beneath its gaze. I felt myself laid bare, not merely seen, but known.
A terror deeper than death clenched my heart. The knowledge that the choice of my fate rested not in my own hands,
but in the silent judgment of those masked figures and the emperor they served. At last the light dimmed. The adept lowered the staff and the runes faded to a dull glow. No verdict passed their lips. A gesture sent me stumbling from the circle, my legs weak, my mind ringing with the echo of their scrutiny. Behind me, another was called forward. The chant continued, unbroken, eternal. Somewhere in the darkness of that chamber, the Emperor's tithe was being weighed, each soul a candle, each life a question only his unfathomable will could answer. I did not know whether I would serve or be sacrificed. I knew only that my fate was no longer my own. I sat alone in the narrow cell they had given me, a rectangle of black stone and cold light. The walls drank every sound until even my own breathing felt stolen. Somewhere deep in the ship a great engine throbbed, a slow and patient rhythm that seemed older than stars. Its pulse wrapped around my thoughts like a chain, steady and inescapable. The silence inside my head frightened me more than the testing. For so long the whispers had been my shadow, sometimes torment, sometimes warning. Now they were gone, cut away by the ship's null fields. The emptiness they left behind felt like losing a part of myself. I should have been relieved, yet I mourned the absence as though a friend had died. Fear came in waves. First, a quick, sharp panic. The memory of the masked adepts, their crystal staves humming with the power to peel away a soul. Then a slower dread, heavier than any dream, the knowledge that my life was no longer my own. Somewhere beyond these walls a decision was being made, to train me as a sanctioned servant or to feed my life to the Emperor's throne.
Either path ended the person I had been. I thought of my parents.
Did they already know I was gone? Would they be punished for not betraying me sooner? I had left to keep them safe, but my absence might mark them with suspicion that never faded. Guilt pressed against my chest until it hurt to breathe. I whispered a prayer for them, the words trembling like a fragile flame. The ship's heartbeat answered with a slow metallic echo. Perhaps it was only the engines, but in that sound I heard a strange kind of promise, something vast and patient, watching without malice. I could not tell if it was the Emperor himself or merely the vessel that carried his will. Yet in the steady rhythm there was a quiet meaning, that even in fear, my life touched something greater than itself. I remembered the visions that had tempted me, the demons of the warp, their offers of freedom and unbounded power. For a heartbeat I had wanted what they promised, but their beauty had hidden a hunger that would have devoured everything I loved. Perhaps the Emperor's tithe, terrible as it was, spared me from a darker end. A single lumen strip flickered overhead, casting a brief halo across the Blackstone. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe with the ship's pulse. Terror still lurked at the edge of my thoughts, but beneath it stirred something quieter, an acceptance that my suffering might carry meaning, even if I never learned what it was. Whether I served as an astropath or became a spark to feed the Astronomicon, I would join a purpose beyond my own fear. I did not know if hope was meant to comfort or to deceive. But, as the ship's ancient heartbeat filled the silence, I let the fragile thought settle that even a soul measured and taken might still, in the Emperor's sight, matter. Far beneath the vault of stars, the black ship glided into the hidden orbit of holy terror. No viewports revealed the world below.
Instead, a darkness vaster than any void stretched beyond the hull.
Yet through the psychic hush, I felt a presence older and greater than all creation. The Astronomicon, his beacon, called to every fibre of my being. It began as a tremor, a pulse too deep for hearing, like the first heartbeat of a newborn universe. The ship's wards quivered in answer, their runes flickering with cold blue light. The Synol fields could not mute it.
Nothing could.
The Emperor's will bled through every barrier, an ocean of thought whose tide no mortal mind could escape. The Adepts led us into a sanctum at the ship's core, a chamber vast enough to swallow a cathedral. Here, the walls were carved from black stone, laced with veins of silver that glimmered like captive lightning. At the center hung a sphere of living crystal, its surface alive with rivers of fire and shadow.
I knew without words that this was no mere artifact.
It was a fragment of the great beacon itself, a lens through which the Emperor's light pierced the Imperium. The air tasted of ozone and burnt incense. Chanting rose from hidden choirs, each note a thread in a hymn older than the Imperium. Their voices joined in harmonic resonance with the distant heart of terror, where the golden throne consumed its endless sacrifice. I felt their song shiver through my bones, and for an instant I saw beyond the veil. Space itself unfolded. The Imperium stretched like a sea of molten glass, its storms parted by a single blazing spear of light. The Astronomicon burned at its heart, a sun of pure will, white gold and eternal, holding back the endless night. Around it swirled the echoes of 1 billion souls, each a fleeting spark snuffed the moment it flared. They were the Emperor's tithe, Psykers gathered from every corner of the galaxy, their essence fed into the throne until only ash remained. The sight was terrible and sublime. The light did not warm.
It scoured.
It bore no pity, no malice, only the absolute necessity of survival. Without that beacon, the Imperium would drown in warp storms, and every human world would be lost to the predations of the great enemy. Yet every instant of its brilliance was paid for in lives like mine. I felt the hunger of the throne, a gravity of thought that pulled at my own soul. For a heartbeat, the whispers of chaos stirred at the edges of my mind, mocking the sacrifice, promising freedom beyond the Emperor's reach. But the beacon blazed brighter, and their murmurs withered like smoke. The Adepts knelt, their golden masks gleaming in the crystal's glow. I sank beside them, not from reverence, but from the weight of what I beheld. The Astronomicon's fire filled the Imperium and my own thoughts alike, a brilliance that burned away every doubt until only awe remained. In that light, I understood the price of the Imperium's survival. A ceaseless harvest of souls, an empire sustained by the very lives it must consume. The Emperor's will endured, and in its shadow the galaxy lived forever balanced between salvation and damnation, upon a flame that could never be allowed to die.